Good morning. This is Eddie Dawson. I'm the chair of the Technology and Innovation Professional section. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes before we get started to get a few more people into the room here. So we have a poll up right now if you guys want to participate in that. We'll get started shortly. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Technology Tuesday, hosted by the Technology and Innovation Professional section, or TIPS, in APGA. My name is Eddie Dawson. I am the chair of TIPS. It is my pleasure today to introduce today's speaker, Carissa Doherty. She'll be presenting on technology and digital literacy, engaging with non-IT stakeholders. Carissa is the head of knowledge management at Morton Arboretum. Her role, in addition to overseeing the library and plant clinic, is to promote collaboration, facilitate information flow, develop institutional knowledge strategy, and implement appropriate digital tools for both internal and external audiences. She currently serves on the editorial advisory group for the Public Garden magazine. Attendees are encouraged to ask her questions today. To do so, please find the hand icon on the right side of the screen, press it, and then wait to be called on. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Carissa. I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Eddie. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. So before diving into the topics of digital literacy and technology evaluation, I wanted to start out by providing a bit of context. Who am I to presume that I have anything useful to say about technology, digital literacy, or evaluation? Well, to do that, first I have a couple of confessions. First off, I am not a digital native. So I did not encounter one of these bad boys until I was in high school. And even then, it was a bit of a novelty. I learned to use computers, but I wasn't really a computer fanatic. I could see that they had a purpose, that they could be useful tools, but I wasn't necessarily an early adopter. Fast forward a couple of decades and we come to my second confession. I'm not even in IT. I've never had formal training in technology, and I've neither technology nor digital in my current job title. But nevertheless, you'll find that I do have a lot to say about technology. For whatever reason, my career path led me to a place where I served as a liaison between technical and non-technical staff. It wasn't even necessarily in my job description, or in the past or today. It's just that I saw a need to connect experts in different fields and to help them communicate in order to complete projects and achieve their goals. Programmers do not necessarily speak the same language as curators or horticulturists or other folks at our institutions. I would be in meetings, excuse me, I would be in meetings and listen to people talking completely past each other, neither side understanding the other, what the other one was trying to do. And somewhere along the way, I learned enough about technology, about how technology works, to be dangerous. And because I'm most interested in how technology is actually employed, how it's used, I also learned how to evaluate the most appropriate uses for technology from the user perspective. And this role of translator is one of the things I hope to convince you all of today, that really is an important thing to cultivate. It's important to be able to see technology from multiple user perspectives. And this is something you should really try to cultivate in yourself, seek out as you're hiring, and inspire among your coworkers and peers. Being a translator means constantly negotiating between two competing perspectives. I have a feeling they're going to sound familiar to you. The first is most commonly coming from non-technical staff, but I've heard it from folks in IT as well. We've always done it that way. This is the anti-change perspective, the if it ain't broke, don't fix it camp. But ironically, it's often this group of people who complain the most about the current state of affairs. So this is one of the perspectives that I've tried to combat over the years. And the opposite side is technology for technology's sake. This one really bugs me. It mostly bugs me because I'm seen as a technology person. Again, even if I don't have technology in my job title, it just has become part of who I am. And so by default, people seem to think I'm going to be on their side when they mention new technology. And that's, that's completely legitimate to think, but really, and I'm sure some of you have already encountered this, my favorite thing is when people say, we need an app. Oh, we need to communicate about an event. We need an app for that. Oh, we need to do community outreach. Oh, we need an app for that. It seems to be everyone's favorite thing to get in an app. But really, do people really need an app? Do they understand what an app is and what it actually can or can't do for us? How many of us are actually willing to push back on those people that ask us for apps and ask why? Why? Why do they need an app? What is it for? I have no problem being an app killer. I actually quite enjoy it, especially when we can find a more appropriate and more relevant solution. I think both of these perspectives, we've always done it this way and the technology for technology's sake perspectives are equally dangerous, especially when it comes to evaluating and adopting new technology. One prevents us from moving forward, and the other one has us moving forward aimlessly without clear goals. Technology is a means to an end, but we need to know how to frame what the end actually means, ideally taking into account both IT and non-IT perspectives. And interestingly, as you'll hear, my strategy for dealing with both of these viewpoints is the same. Listening carefully, asking questions, one question in particular, you'll see if you can figure out what that is by the end of the presentation, and coming at it from a problem-solving orientation, which is where digital literacy comes in. So what is digital literacy? I'm going to call myself out here on the use of jargon and make sure that I define what I mean when I say digital literacy. So digital literacy for me is really less of a specific set of skills than a kind of a mindset. First, it's a certain comfort level in dealing with technology. And this is not a generational thing. I know plenty of people who are over 65 who are willing to jump right into exploring new technologies, and an equal number of younger people who are a bit afraid to press buttons. It comes from personality, from past encounters with technology or technology people, and from exposure to new experiences. Being digitally literate, in my definition, means not being afraid to break something. It means being willing to experiment. Next is the ability to talk about technology and understand what you're talking about in a logical and coherent way. This is not necessarily having, a massive vocabulary. It's just having a shared vocabulary and realizing that a lot of tech terms need to be translated and connected to real-world scenarios. I'll be talking a bit more about this in a few minutes. Last, I would argue that digital literacy means having some understanding of what would make any given technology good or bad. This doesn't mean that everyone has to know exactly how a technology works. It simply means you need to be able to formulate questions about why you would or wouldn't use a particular technology, what it's actually good for. This is the evaluation piece, which I'll address toward the end of the presentation. Before giving some examples about how to improve digital literacy at your garden, I wanted to emphasize why you'd want to do so in the first place. So I'm gonna try to open up a poll here. One sec. Get a answer here. So I'm gonna ask, at your garden, how often are non-IT staff involved with technology-related decisions? So I know some of you are from technology. I saw from the poll results, about, I think, over half of you are from actually IT, but I think you can probably answer. Here, I'll give this a couple minutes. I can kind of see how many people have voted. Half of you, 63%, 88, one more. All right, I'm gonna close it. I think there's one other person missing, but I'm gonna. So you said that I don't know how to display this. Oh, here. 63% of the time, most of the time, 63% of you responded that most of the time non-IT staff are involved, which is good, or occasionally, which is also very good, because really, IT decisions affect everyone in our organizations. And that's kind of what I wanted to point out. So why is digital literacy important? I want to make sure that I say up front that none of the things I'm talking about today are in any way intended to diminish the importance of or expertise of IT staff. This isn't about taking over IT's job or knowing more than you trained professionals, because you guys have the kind of training that is essential to our organizations, and I'm not trying to take that away at all. But what I do want to do is really demystify technology and actually have it so that people can understand what we're talking about, and have better conversations about technology, and empowering everyone to contribute to those conversations about our digital future. In fact, the benefits I'm going to talk about just now really have to do with IT and improving IT's working relationships among staff. So let's start with the first one. Less complaining. This sounds a little bit maybe counterintuitive, but having staff with a basic level of digital literacy can actually decrease the amount of complaining people do about technology. One, just knowing that IT staff speak their language helps people see that we're all on the same side. I think it's a fairly common phenomenon for people to kind of roll their eyes a little bit, like, oh, I have to get IT involved. That's not good, and it'd be better if that did not happen. Actually, people started seeing more often IT as a partner in the things that they do, and as a kind of a first line of defense. And maybe at some of your institutions that is the case, and that's terrific. I think generally at any large organization, or a large or small organization, there's always some level of siloing, and digital literacy is just one way to bridge that gap. And further, if people have a better idea about how and why a technology ought to function, they better understand how and why it can fail. So if they do complain, it might be more constructive, and they might have the ability to better describe what they're complaining about, and they can provide more useful information for troubleshooting and evaluation. The second major benefit of digital literacy has to do with leadership and the often unrealistic expectations that are set for technology-related projects. How many times has anyone heard, or maybe even said yourself, this technology will solve our problem? which is not usually not the complete story. Technology can be part of a solution, but there's always other things that come into place. You know, the people side of things, the process side of things, all these things come into play. A technology is very rarely you know, a complete fix for anything. But being able to truly communicate to stakeholders, leaders in particular, but really this can apply to all levels of the organization, helping people understand that technology is almost always a means to an end rather than an end in and of itself. This can really lessen the burden of having to produce a miraculous technology that solves everyone's problems. Finally, increased digital literacy can lead to better project outcomes. Now, what do I mean by better? Well, part of it is more buy-in. When people are able to actively participate in a technology project, they're usually more willing to put time and effort into making it work once it's deployed. And the other part is actually establishing outcomes together, technical and non-technical staff. If IT's goals have everything to do with security, but they don't consider user experience, the project will not be successful, and vice versa. So now that you're completely convinced this is worth your time, right? Everyone's convinced. How can you improve digital literacy at your garden? I'm going to argue that the best way to do this is informally, rather than through some kind of formal training. This bias is partially a reflection of my own personal teaching style, but also partially based on observing how and why people typically resist change, specifically technology-related change. I'm sure there are many other valid ways to approach this, but I'm going to use a program that I've developed here at the Arboretum as an example of how to achieve these three main goals of digital literacy. This all began just after I came to the Arboretum about 3 years ago. Within a week of my starting, again, no technology in my title, 3 separate people, 2 of whom are on our leadership team, came to me asking about getting a 3D printer. They had heard about some of the work I'd done in my previous role at the Art Institute, and they'd read some article that was making the rounds, and they were convinced we needed to get a 3D printer. And this is, I'm sure, you know, this has probably happened to some of you before. This is not the first or last time this has happened to me. I've had people come to me and say, oh, we need to do virtual reality. We need to do... Great. Do you know what that means? Do you know what that means and what the implications are? You get these words from the news, these ideas from pop culture, from other gardens, other museums, and they're convinced they need it. They need this thing, this shiny object, this new object. But they don't necessarily understand kind of what it would be used for. Why would you employ this type of technology? And this is where this program that I developed comes in. It's called MELD, and it stands for Make, Experiment, Learn, and Discuss. This is an informal monthly gathering that gives all staff the opportunity to get hands-on experience with technology. I've done sessions on virtual reality. You can see there with Google Cardboard on the bottom there, Google SketchUp, Tree ID apps, the zombie apocalypse, because who doesn't want to learn about the zombie apocalypse, and dozens of other topics that really require a deeper dive to understand what all these things mean and what they're about. So the outcomes for MELD really address each of the elements of digital literacy that I mentioned earlier. The first one is just really less apprehension and anxiety around technology. This is addressed simply by putting technology into people's hands. You give them a Google Cardboard. You put them in front of crowdsourcing apps. You give them exposure to ideas that they might have heard in passing, but they've not really considered how they might actually be used. And then you give them permission to play. One thing that's a little bit controversial, I guess, about what I'm doing is that it's not really, it's not super practical. It's intentionally not related to any real project. Now, of course, I've seen some ideas that we've talked about among this, this group that meets. I've heard the ideas talked about in different other settings, when we are talking about specific projects. But for the MELD sessions themselves, they're really intended to be completely free form and open so that it really encourages experimentation and there's no outcome kind of hanging over people's heads. This isn't an exclusive group at all. Any staff can attend. There's no prerequisite knowledge. So we really get a ton of non-IT staff, visitor services, education, development, marketing, the library. We have people from all over kind of coming together to do this hands-on experimentation. And so a really interesting great byproduct of all of this is really breaking through some of those silos. There are people that interact during MELD sessions who do not interact otherwise, or who don't interact on kind of a regular basis. And so that exchange of ideas, even if it is over kind of as someone is kind of playing with some kind of digital interactive, that's good. That's a way of connecting with people that we don't often really appreciate and get to do very much. Of course, not everyone has the time to attend, and there are plenty of people who don't see the value in it, honestly, as much as it hurts. And that's okay. The hope is really that this, even the people that attend can then take that more open attitude toward new technologies and have those ideas kind of infect and percolate through the rest of the organization for those people who don't participate. So the second outcome, we address this at nearly every session. We try to devote the majority of any given meeting to the hour-long meeting to hands-on activities, getting technology or whatever it is we're talking about in their hands. But even so, we do need to have some kind of context setting. So I or the guest speaker will usually spend the first 10 minutes or so kind of providing some important context, giving definitions. If it's a technology platform, like we did something about Twitter, we may spend a few minutes talking about why it was developed, kind of how it's evolved over time, and kind of what the context is in broader society. And then work on developing and defining together what some of the terminology means. So you talk about a Twitter handle or at mentioning. Those are things that we define as part of the session itself, and really get people thinking about kind of how we use those words and that vocabulary. And then this all, the other outcome is really kind of leads to more informed technology-related decisions, so that we're really coming together and thinking about these things in a way that we have a shared foundation. So I am willing to bet, even among all of us who are tech savvy, we'd be hard pressed to come up with a common, consistent definition of any of these terms. I'm going to open up another poll really quick here. So you may or may not know some of these terms that are on the screen. When I'm launching this and I see that there's actually a typo here, it says, how often does it feel like you're speaking a different language from your colleagues? It's colleagues, so your peers. So you're at your garden, you're at a conference, at APGA conference. How often do you feel like you need clarification on something someone else is saying, or vice versa? How often do you feel like something is coming out of your mouth and you're not entirely sure that your audience is getting it? I'm seeing the poll responses come in. This is great. I'll give you another second here. Two more people. All right, 3, 2, 1. I'm just going to close it, and I'll show you what I see here. So, so a lot of us feel like we're not, almost a quarter of us feel like we're speaking a different language all the time, and at least most of us feel like we're speaking a different language some of the time, and that doesn't have to be the case. So I'm going to go back here. No. I'm going to try, okay. And I'm going to focus on API just because it comes up a lot in the work that I do. So giving the literal definition for this acronym, application programming interface, doesn't really help clarify for us non-programmers. That kind of just doesn't really help much more. Even giving the Wikipedia definition, which is a set of subroutine definitions, protocols, and tools for building application software, even that doesn't give us too much more to work with. Someone might smile and nod, but chances are they're not really going to get it until you say something like, it's how one software program knows how to communicate or exchange information with another software program. Now, is that, for those of you who are technology people in the audience, is that 100% accurate? Well, maybe not. It's a little more complicated than that. But it puts API into familiar terms. In fact, at that point, you might not even need to use the term API. You could just explain it in this way. And it also gives you a jumping off point for talking about why it's important. It gives you the foundation for saying things like, if a program has an API, it gives us the ability to have it talk directly to our point of sale system so that you don't have to input data twice. Now that really connects this term, which is probably completely unfamiliar to them, to something that they do on a daily basis. And why is that important? Because it really allows us to engage people with evaluating technology. So, one of the formats that I've found successful in this MELD group is what I like to call Smackdowns. Basically, this is a very rapid, very high level evaluation. Sorry, I'm missing something here. Done in small groups. I've found that it helps reinforce some of the digital literacy concepts that I'm interested in cultivating. But the basic principles of the Smackdown can also be applied to larger scale, longer term evaluations as well. Evaluation has an element of subjectivity. What's useful to one person might not be useful to another. If anyone's ever sat down with someone and watched them interact with something even as basic as their online calendar, it's really interesting. I always learn something new when I watch someone else use their technology. But taking evaluation step by step removes some of the subjectivity and really reinforces the idea that technology is a means to an end rather than an end in of itself. All right, I have another poll here. When were you last involved in a major technology-related decision? Oh, wow, everyone's finished already. Okay, I'll close this and share it. So a lot of you involved with the technology-related decisions, which is great, and that's probably why you're here, listening to what I'm having to say about evaluating technology. So that's good. I'm glad that people are involved with this, and I'm hoping that the kind of really general principles that I'm going to outline will be helpful in kind of further projects. Okay. So the first and most important step whenever I'm doing what we're calling the Smackdown or kind of a more formal evaluation is really figuring out what that technology is for. Why would you use it? Why wouldn't you use it? Why would you go with an alternative? What problems does it solve? You also have to take into account the human element. Who's going to be using the technology? What are their goals? Their challenges? How does one type of user's experience differ from another? So let's take tree ID apps as an example. This is actually something that I've done with a group of staff to evaluate tree ID apps. There's a couple dozen of them out there. What are they for? Well, tree ID apps at the most basic level are for, you guessed it, correctly identifying trees. But for different types of people, the app might serve different purposes. For staff at the Arboretum, for example, many of whom literally are able to do tree ID without an app, it's not necessarily for being able to identify everything. It's for quickly and accurately identifying a wide range of things that are found on our grounds. For a novice or for the general public, a tree ID app might be really to learn more about the parts of a tree, to even figure out, okay, so what is a branch? What is an opposite versus alternate leaf structure? And get familiar with that terminology and then be able to get close. So is it in the maple family? Is it a ginkgo? Is it deciduous? Is it coniferous? Some of those things. So really the goal for a tree ID app would be very different for those two groups of people. And evaluating the technology then requires us to understand what it is for each of those groups. So I'm going to give another kind of specific example. Video conferencing software. One of which we're using right now, right? Go to webinar. So one of the things video conferencing software is for is being able to see and hear other participants. Really basic. Of course, that's what it's for. What else is it for? It needs to be a viable alternative to meeting in person or calling someone up on the phone. And it's for having an enhanced meeting experience. So not only is it an alternative, but maybe it's even better than meeting in person. Maybe it's even better than meeting over the phone. That would be one of the goals for video conferencing software. That's the what is it for. Second, excuse me, you need to take a look at that what is it for list and determine what categories or tasks against each of which of those things you can evaluate. So think about the tasks, not the features. You don't need a video conferencing tool with single sign-on, which is a feature. You need a streamlined way to log in and access the platform, which is a task. So that's kind of the difference there. What do people actually need to do? What are the things they need to accomplish with that technology? How does this change and ideally improve their current experience? Or how does that, how is it better than an alternative experience offered by another tool or platform? What's most, and also developing this list, this kind of evaluation category and task list, helps you figure out what's most important. What are things that are kind of make or break scenarios, and which are just nice to haves. This list will be the basis upon which you'll be able to make your final decision about the technology. Documenting these categories and tasks is essential for both being able to justify your decision in the end, as well as keeping track of testing progress if this is a longer term or more complicated evaluation project. So let's go back to the video conferencing app example. We go back to the what is it for, being able to hear or see other participants. Well, this can break down into audio quality, being able to test audio quality, testing video quality, and testing how those two things are synchronized. Those can then be turned into a task list. Then again, viable alternatives to in-person or phone meetings. You might look at cost. You might look at cost, the ease of meeting setup, the ability to conduct the meeting, and being able to send invitations. And as far as enhancing the meeting experience, you might want to be able to share your screen, chat with other participants, or have a suite of tools for hosting and controlling the meeting itself. So, looking at this list, you can see that some of these require you up front or as a part of the evaluation group to define things like quality. Right? What does good quality audio mean? What does ease of use mean? And you have to think about those things ahead of time and define those, ideally with examples. So does easy mean the fewest number of clicks? Or does it mean the buttons are really clearly labeled? What does easy mean for that group of people? And then kind of also for the end use case. Take the time to really talk about these things because everyone's idea of easy is very different. In defining these tasks, you'll also need to create some kind of feedback mechanism for yourself or your participants to gather and record your results. For the Smackdown exercise, really it's very simple. I've found the simple worksheet is usually best. Again, it's important to discuss and define what easy or difficult means or functional, not functional means. So that's kind of done orally and as a group. For more complex evaluations, I've found that a task-based list with specific criteria is helpful. It can still be a kind of worksheet or living document, a Google Doc or Google spreadsheet. But you can also, instead of having a document that is done by individuals, you can also do this in person. You can have meetings and talk about things in person, which can be more time-consuming, but it can be helpful in case you need clarification or want to ask questions or kind of want to dig into any of the things more deeply. Finally, you need a way to report on the evaluation you've conducted. This is important whether your audience are the people in the room, as the case with these kind of informal Smackdowns, or a board of trustees. If this is a major technology decision, you're going to need to report on the process. It demonstrates that technology evaluation is a rational and user-based process, and it goes a long way toward demystifying technology and helping people understand what makes a good technology solution. So as an example, this is from an informal session. Visuals are always good. This is a quick example of a matrix. So we've got 4 quadrants here. We've got usability on the x-axis and functionality on the y-axis, and basically these are icons representing different note-taking applications. That was another Smackdown we did, and so we had a list of criteria, and the 2 main things we were thinking about were, how usable were things, how easy was it to kind of get into the note-taking app and start using it, and then how functional was, how did things work? Did they work as you expected them to? And so what we did was we broke down into different groups, and each group tested the apps. Each one was assigned a couple of different things to test out. We came back together, had a discussion, and then each group went up there and basically kind of pinned the tail on the donkey style, took their app icon and stuck it on this this matrix. So the things in the upper right quadrant that you can see up there are apps that are both functional and usable. The further toward the top and the further toward the right, are the most functional and usable, and the things toward the bottom, are less functional and usable. Again, it's a super scientific no. That was not the intent. The intent was really to get people to talk about what it means to have a good note-taking app, and and then also give people a good starting point if they are looking for one themselves to use in their work or their personal life. For a more complex and formal evaluation, something like the spreadsheet documenting outcomes is really helpful. This is for the tree ID Smackdown that I mentioned earlier. It breaks down each of the evaluation categories, and there's a rating scale. Again, we defined all this ahead of time. And then there's some level of detail for each of these apps. This was intended so people could go back later and be able to make recommendations for their staff, or for even potentially the public, because we get asked a lot about Tree ID apps. And this was a kind of a launching point for that conversation. And of course, for a larger scale evaluation, if you're looking at something more formally, you're looking for a new content management system or a point of sale system, anything like that, the reporting is really going to require you to have an executive summary and a concise accounting of the goals of the project, the what is it for, which you've hopefully already done, so that your results are easily digestible by your leadership team. Okay, I have a couple more questions here. Poll. If you were involved with a technology decision recently, how much influence did you have over that process or decision? Give it a couple seconds. Oh, there we go. 82%. I think we got 1 or 2 more people. Okay, so here are results. A lot of folks attending today have actually made these technology decisions themselves or had a good deal of control over the decision. So I have a follow-up question for you guys, the 77% of you who had a lot of control over that that decision. If you had a lot of influence over the decision, are you an end user? Are you one of the people that actually has to use the software on a daily basis? Not as an administrator, not like, oh, I'm assigning people to tasks or doing any of the back-end stuff, but actually using it. Data entry, selling tickets, that kind of thing. Okay, this probably seems not 100%, but I can see that not everyone would respond if they didn't make a decision. So let me show you. So the majority of you actually are not the end user, so which is fine. I mean, I think that's your decision-making process. Again, has a lot to do with technology and technology strategy. Absolutely, something that it's a valid approach. When you're not a user, though, when you're not an end user, you might not understand all of the different facets, and that's kind of where I'm headed with all of this, is the basic approach and kind of how digital literacy actually plays in and improves that process. Okay, so your role. So a lot of you mentioned that you are in fact decision makers or are very much involved with the decision-making process. What does this all mean for you? What is this process, evaluation process, this broad outline, what does it mean? So can you just sit back and relax and let everyone else take care of the evaluation? No, not at all. In fact, I hate to break it to you, but all of this stuff being more inclusive and actually talking to non-IT stakeholders takes quite a bit more work. Maybe even significantly more work. But in making that attempt and you know, trying to reach out to folks who, the end users, the folks who actually have something to say about technology, they might not know it and they might not feel comfortable with the technology, but who actually do have something to say about it. In making the attempt to reach those folks and talk to them, we signal to our leaders and our fellow employees that we're partners in the decisions and that technology can be a useful tool and it's not an interference or a distraction to their work. As a facilitator for technology evaluations, you're responsible for shepherding the process. One of the things you should be doing is keep asking, what is it for, or why? So why do you need that feature? What are you using it for? Doing that not only helps, you know, someone understand themselves, okay, well, yeah, why do I need that? Why am I saying that? What does that mean? It also helps kind of clarify how people are using a specific technology. Like I said, every time I sit down with someone with their on their own computer and then kind of look over their shoulder as they're doing something, they almost always do something differently than I do. And it's fascinating, and it's not wrong. And sometimes in fact, it's better than the way I do it. And it's really great to see, and asking why you're doing that or what is it for can really help kind of strengthen that understanding. As a facilitator, documentation, I think I mentioned it a few times in those kind of steps. It's really important to document what you're doing, how you're making the decisions, not only for yourself so that you can kind of remember what happened, but so that you can show people and demonstrate that this is in fact a rational step-by-step process. Setting up use cases and test scenarios. So whenever possible, start with actual tasks rather than feature lists. Like, it has this feature check. It can be useful, I guess, if you're kind of doing the first kind of filtering of different options. But when it comes down to it, the technology is meant to be used and it will be put into use. So you need to think through what those use cases are. More documentation. I can't reinforce this enough. Documenting those test cases, those use case scenarios, will help you remember why you chose or kind of leaned a certain way over another. I've had to do this multiple times, and it's just very helpful to be able to return to that kind of thorough documentation. Communication. This should be obvious, but I want to reinforce this. As a facilitator of a technology evaluation, constantly communicating about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and just keeping people informed. The more you can do this, the better. And then do it some more, because even after you're done with the technology, done with the selection, you've chosen something, it's put into place, it's deployed, you still, the process is not done. You still need to train people, you still need to get people bought in and understanding that this can help them, it will help them. Maybe there's a hurdle there to overcome, but in the end, your goal is to get everyone kind of on board, and the only way you can do that is communication. And then, kind of more broadly, cultivating digital literacy. You don't have to put together something like Meld. That is not necessary. I enjoy doing it. I think it's fun, but it's also quite a bit of work. There are other things you can do without maybe even really changing what you're doing currently, just kind of adding another layer of communication that will help set this transformation in motion. One of those things is de-jargonifying. So whenever you can, take the time to explain technology terms or even non-technology words. So for those of us who are not all IT all the time, there's plenty of other words that other areas use. Marketing, I think, has plenty of jargon. Development, there's every area of our gardens has different layers of jargon. When we can understand that jargon and kind of toss it back and forth and there's a complete understanding, great. But as we saw from the poll question before, that is not necessarily the case. Most of us do feel that part of the time we are speaking a different language, and we can go a long way in starting with ourselves and saying, oh right, I tossed this term out there, let me take a step back and just make sure everyone understands what that means. And doing the same for other people, kind of, when it's appropriate, checking them to say, okay, you just use this word, this is what I think that means. Do we agree on that? And are we talking about the same thing? Because if we're not, then we need to figure that out first. Most, again, it's not necessarily about just defining things either. It's explaining why something's important and how it links to something in real life. The more we can talk about this, the better. It can be complicated with technology. I'm not going to lie. You're not going to do this all the time. But when you can, and when when the folks you're working with are receptive to it, it really can't hurt. Listening more and listening better. Now, I'm not suggesting the IT help desk becomes some kind of therapy provider, but really trying to understanding how technology, especially a new or disruptive technology, impacts people will make deploying it go much more smoothly. If you know how or why someone's protesting or kind of complaining about something, it might feel a little bit personal, like, oh gosh, well, you're just complaining about IT all the time. Try to, distance yourself from that and really kind of, what is their perspective? Why do they feel this way? Maybe it's something you can actually resolve with them, and maybe they just need someone to listen to them. They literally just need someone to register their complaint and move on. Again, will this take a little bit of time? Sure, but in strengthening those relationships, it'll make things go more smoothly further down the road. And then involve others. So you talked about how earlier the poll question about how often non-IT stakeholders are involved, and I think most of you responded that they were, which is great, because a new technology only really succeeds if it gets used to its best advantage by the people for whom it's intended. And because that success in the end really relies on people, getting a new technology integrated into your garden's everyday operations is really a matter of change management. It's easing that discomfort that many people feel when transitioning to a new way of doing things. It's the, combating that we've always done it that way mindset. And making sure that you don't end up with an unused system. So if people are really, really against something and you don't take the time to understand and kind of get that input from people, you might end up with a system that doesn't get used, and then how can that be successful? So one way to do this is to get ambassadors on your side. Some of these people, you might already have people in your mind, they're easy to recruit. They're excited about technology, they're not afraid to try new things, they're a fan of you or your department's work. Those are the people that are really easy to get on your side. But they're not always the most effective ambassadors, because a lot of times the most effective ambassadors are the people with the biggest mouths, really. They're the ones who can influence everyone else. They might not be the ones who are comfortable with technology at first. But once they're on your side, they can be the most vocal advocates for the technology that you're trying to deploy, and the first line of defense when other people have questions. I have a story from my previous job, a curator who just, every day complaining all the time about this particular system that we use, a system that I was put in charge of kind of getting out there and helping people connect with and use on a daily basis. Now, I could have wrote her off, as at least a couple of my colleagues did, as just someone who complains. Okay, she's just complaining. But I took the time to sit with her, and yeah, it was a little bit painful. It felt personal at times, like, oh, why doesn't it do this? And it felt defensive. But she really just needed someone to sit with her and understand how she was using it. And even a couple of quick changes that didn't really impact, weren't dramatic changes, but things that we could change that were in our control that made her experience better. After, again, not a quick process, but after a year or two, she was defending me. She was defending me in front of other, not even me, like the system itself, defending that in front of other people. And that change, because people saw it and they heard it and they recognized that this person who, again, had been one of the harshest critics was now on the other side, it made such a big difference. And I remain friends with her to this day. It's just a really interesting and really rewarding relationship to have with someone who, again, maybe did not start as a person who was embracing technology, but ended up really thinking about how it could help them in their jobs. How do you get these ambassadors? You get them by listening, by explaining, by connecting what technology does to people's everyday work, by involving people in decisions, giving them special privileges, celebrating milestones with them. So I apologize, I've not given you super hard and fast or step-by-step instructions for evaluating technology. I hope it wasn't false advertising on that front. But what I've talked about, it really doesn't require anything expensive. It doesn't require you, a lot of extra things. It doesn't require technology at all, really. It involves a commitment to communication and transparency, which is something I hope you can all find useful. So that wraps up what I have to say. I'm going to try to figure out this raising hand business here. I'm happy to take questions. I have not been looking at the chat, so I don't know if one of my fellow moderators can jump in. If there are things that appeared in the chat that I did not see that I should address, please feel free to jump in. And I will try to figure out if anyone's raising their hand. But this is the time to do it. If you have any questions or comments or things you'd like to say, feel free to raise your hand by using that little hand icon there. You can see the little guy there. And I'd be happy to speak more about anything you said. Okay, I see. All right. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. It looks like you've had your hand raised for a long time. Steve Luther. How do I call on you? Okay. Steve, do you have a question?
Yes, it's actually not a question. It's more of a comment. You had one of your surveys is that you had talked about when was the last time that you were involved with a technology decision. There is a counterpart to that, and it would have been a good one to have was that when was the last time you were not involved in a technology decision? And the thing is that all of a sudden you find out that the technology decision has been made and that now you've got to support it.
That is a great question. Yeah, you're right. That would have been a really interesting perspective, and I think that happens more than we'd like, right?
It happens quite frequently.
Well, great.
And
thanks for that. Oh, go ahead.
What I was just going to say was that, it is just interesting to find out that how many people do feel that they understand technology, and yet the technology that they understand is basically tied to a cell phone. And it isn't anything to deal with actually what reality is in terms of what is technology.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the only way to combat that is just like constant conversation about it. I mean,
right.
have you come up with, have you had a better, or have you had different experiences in kind of, working through that with folks you work with?
Yes, basically what we wind up doing is pushing out, things being, when I first came to Denver Botanic Gardens, nobody was coming to the technology department because the thing is that they did not believe that the technology department was able to provide the services that was needed. And when I came here, that was one of my major charges, was to reverse that and get people to come back into technology and ask the technology questions. So far, we've been fairly successful in doing that, but by doing that, we set up a roadmap in terms of how do we present technology so that we can show that the technology is beneficial to the gardens. And that is one thing that is utmost in getting that communication lines re-established if they were broken, or to reinforce it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to hear maybe at a different time kind of more how you did that, because I think that is definitely a challenge that I think a lot of gardens face, and it's cool that you've kind of been through that and come out on the other side.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to go to the next person who's raised their hand. Thanks, Steve. I've got, let's see, Gio. I've unmuted you if you want to chime in.
Can you hear me?
I can. You're a little bit quiet, but I can.
Oh, that's so cool. Hi, I just wanted to say thank you very much, because your point of view is really helpful, because so many times I say to my boss, this is not a technology problem. So a lot of the stuff that you said, I'm going to steal it. My question is, can I watch this and listen to this again?
Yes, we are recording. I think maybe at the end, someone can chime in from the association, or maybe Eddie can chime in about where we can find it afterwards.
Okay.
But yes, it has been recorded.
And I also wanted to confirm what a previous person said. For me personally, as an IT manager, most of the time a decision is made and handed to me, and I didn't get any buy-in. So what I've done is to combat that is lots of times just started showing up in a lot of extra meetings. Take my laptop so I can keep on working, and I'm kind of pushing my way through a little bit because of that.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And yeah, I think we can share kind of where this will be located and kept afterwards. So if you want to rewatch or share or whatever, that'd be great. All right, thank you, Gio. And now I've got, let's see, how much time do we have? Oh, a few minutes. Okay, so I'll, Lynn, I see I am, I'm trying to unmute you, Lynn, but there's some kind of audio pin situation. Let me see, you've also asked a question somewhere. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, so I can see your question, Lynn. If you can't get to the audio pin, that's fine. I'll read it. It says, I'm involved with a new website decision now. The communications team is going for visual effects over usability or functionality. How do I persuade them to evaluate on more criteria? Oy, this that's a big question. Well, I think, I mean, part of it, I think maybe both, I'm assuming that you, Lynn, are in more of a technology role. And you're talking about a communications team who's thinking more about visual effects. But what you have in common is the need for people to actually use this thing and to kind of understand what it is. So the website, it needs to be used. It needs to have useful information. It needs to be able to be navigated. One tool that I've found, and again, it takes time and actually maybe some resources to do, is get some actual users, get some, even if it's just a handful of people you pull off the grounds and say, hey, can we put some wireframes in front of you? Can we put some, it doesn't have to be live, it doesn't have to be fully built out. Doing evaluation, formative evaluation on websites is super, super useful. Because chances are, and if you've ever been through usability testing, it is a fascinating, fascinating experience, super frustrating, because what happens is basically a user gets put in a room in front of your technology or in front of a mock-up of your technology, and they're asked to like deal with it. Like, okay, you're on a website, figure out how to buy tickets to an event. Okay, and then you watch them, you can't actually interact with them, you watch them do this, and they talk through, when you have a usability facilitator, they talk through with this person what they're doing. Like, oh, well, I think you click on visit first, and then you would navigate down to here, and they walk through why they're thinking what they're thinking, and it is shocking. Like the things that you think are the most obvious things ever, people just blow right by. The wording that you've spent so much time, or the flashiness that or the design that people spent so much time on, it goes over a lot of people's heads. The best design is a design that is not that doesn't get in front of people, that doesn't deter them from getting to what they want. So that's, I mean, I probably have a lot more to say about that as far as persuading this other group to kind of go in that direction. But one thing that could help both of you, and it might, there might be some things that come up that you're surprised about too, is actually getting an understanding from the other perspective. So rather than the internal perspective, what do people expect to see when they come to your website? What are those criteria for which a user would evaluate your website, and get that perspective, and having the answer to that might help you convince them that you need to spend more time on whatever it is, navigation, information architecture, something else, because you can point to this other thing. Like, it's not about me, it's not about me as a technology person, quote unquote, it's about getting the users what they want. So that, I guess that's my only thought. I'm a really big fan of user testing. It's hard to, it can be expensive, so it's hard to kind of get that committed to sometimes, but it's worth it. It is well worth it. So thanks for that question, Lynn. I'm sorry I wasn't able to talk to you directly. It's always a little bit difficult when I'm looking at this little text thing, but okay. And I think we're at the end of our time, and I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. I don't know if Eddie or if you wanted to jump back on here and kind of close us out, or.
Sure. I'd like to invite Ken also to let everyone know where the download of the webinar will be hosted exactly. If you can address that, and then we can wrap it up. I'd like to also thank everyone for being here, and a special thanks to Carissa for speaking. And I look forward to the next Technology Tuesday, which will be determined in the near future. Ken, are you there?
So to answer the question, there's either going to be a download link in our section, or you will get an email with the download link. But it is being recorded, and we will be able to get it to you. And Christina or one of us can post the link in the tips section as well. So there'll be multiple locations for you to get this download. And if you have any questions on where to get it, you can always email me, and my email is up on the website.
And I just wanted to say, again, thanks for everyone who was able to attend. If anyone does, if they didn't have a chance to ask a question, or if they had comments or anything like that, feel free to email me. I can't put I'm not sure how to put it directly up onto the screen, but my email address is C, my first initial C, Dougherty, DOUGHERTY, at mortonarb, MORTONARB.org. I guess I could put that in the chat, couldn't I? I'll put it there too. Just in case anyone has, wants to continue a conversation, or has anything else to say that they didn't get to today during the presentation.
All right, thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Eddie.